in reflecting upon what happened 10 years ago, I can't help but to reflect about my personal experience about what happened 10 years ago. I remember getting up and going to work. I usually would be at work by 6 o'clock in the morning. We were in special session, believe it or not, about something called redistricting. It was a very political, rancorous process 10 years ago, if you remember. And I went to the office, and I had tried to get some work done there at the accounting office where I worked at that point in time before heading up for us to have session, which we were to gavel in at 1 o'clock. As I was leaving the office, I remember somebody said, somebody flew a small plane into one of the World Trade Center towers. And I went back and just glanced at the television for a minute, and it showed the tower with the smoke coming out. And at that time, we didn't have much information about what was happening. As I got in the car and I was driving home, and I remember getting on the phone and calling my wife and trying to get the details of what had happened. And I remember at 1 o'clock as we were gaveling in, what had transpired over those 3.5 hours before we gavelled in. And how the towers had been struck by aircraft. They had collapsed by that time, and it was very obvious that our nation was under attack. And I remember how there were those of us who went to the Lieutenant Governor at that point in time and asked that we suspend session that day and not deal with something as rancorous and as divisive as redistricting. And Lieutenant Governor said we were going to conduct business anyway. That evening, I went home, and like many of you, I sat glued at the television station, looking at the news accounts and trying to figure out what had happened, and more importantly, what was going to happen. Where was our nation going next? And a very interesting occurrence happened as we were sitting there watching the accounts that evening. My 16-year-old son walked in, looked at the television, turned to my wife and myself, and he said, "I'm ready to go fight. I'm ready to go fight for freedom." For those of you who have family members that are in armed services now and fighting for our freedoms, let me say, appreciate your sacrifice. A lot of times we say thank you, as we should, to all of our soldiers who have gone and put their lives on the line, but many times we forget about the sacrifice of those who are left behind and support them here. Thank you so much for that. But you know, one thing that September the 11th I think really did help us do is it helped us to gain a renewed appreciation, renewed respect for our first responders. While it is the soldier who fights for freedom and to maintain our freedom, it is our first responders who allow us to live in freedom as we do. How many of y'all have seen the movie The Patriotic with Mel Gibson? There's a scene where Gabriel walks into the church and he's trying to call up the South Carolina militia. So he interrupts the church service and he gives a speech about why we need to have individuals to stand up and go fight for freedom. Do you remember what happened? Nobody stood up. And as usually what happens in life, it takes a woman, and his sweetheart stood up and shamed all the men in the church, how they talked big when it came to go fight about freedom, but when it came to acting, they weren't big enough to act on their own. After she gave her eloquent speech, I want you to walk with me a minute on a couple of these scenes. Gabriel smiles and he says, "So who's with us?" The next shot that you see is down at church pew. And I want you to look very carefully when you watch it next time. Because there is a young couple sitting there. And if you look closely, you'll see that she's got his arm like this, trying to hold him down. But as he stands up, she lets go for him to stand up and to go fight for freedom. The next shot is a father sitting next to his wife, and on the other side is his son. He reaches around his wife, he squeezes his son's shoulder, looks at his wife, and the two of them stand up to go fight for freedom. The last scene, and I will have to be very honest with you, that when I watched it in the comfort of my home, at this point I had to put the movie on pause and run upstairs because I got emotional. Because the last shot in there is a father that stands up on the front row, and a young boy, probably no more than middle school age, stands up. And the father looks down to him and nods approvingly as they stand up to fight for freedom. Ladies and gentlemen, we have forgotten what those people went through, the sacrifices that they made to give us the country that we have today. When people talk about making sacrifices, we need to stop for a moment and we need to go back and we need to look at what they gave up, all the things that they considered the conveniences of life in order to make sacrifices on our behalf. And at times we need to be reminded of that. And then we need to be reminded by the fact that freedom is not free. It has to be earned each and every day. And as we look today, we are reflecting about what happened 10 years ago and paying honor to those who lost their lives and those who had many sacrifices given. But here we are 10 years later. What are we faced with today? America has challenges again today. And what is it we're going to do and how are we going to answer that? Well, I'd like to go to another movie that is has a great scene in it of a great philosopher. I hope that you've seen this movie and this scene. The philosopher comes from Philadelphia. His name is Rocky Balboa. If you've seen the last episode of the Rocky Balboa series, the movie Rocky Balboa, there's a scene in there where Rocky and his son walk outside the restaurant, and his son is basically sitting there complaining to his dad. Dad, do you not realize the ridicule I'm taking at work because you're going to go fight this fight? And he talks about how difficult life is for him, the son. In fact, if you look at it, what he's doing is whining. And then Rocky Balboa stands there in the street with his son one-on-one. Now here's a man, a character, but here's a man who has lost fortune. He's lost his wife. He lost his longtime trainer, Mickey. He gained a new good friend in Apollo Creed, of whom he's lost. And now he's just trying to live a little life of running a restaurant. He knows what hard times are. And here's his son trying to find his way, and his son's whining about how hard life is. And what Rocky tells him at that point in time, to me, is very profound. And I wish I could do a Rocky Balboa imitation, but I can't. But he tells his son, he says, life is not all sunshine and rainbows. Life is tough. Life is nasty. And it will knock you to your knees, and it will keep you there permanently if you will let it. He says, you, me, nobody can hit as hard as life can. But let me tell you what, life is not about how hard you hit. Instead, life is how hard a hit you can take and keep moving forward. What you can endure and keep moving forward, because that's how winning is done. Now, that's not good grammar, but that's why he puts it. That's how winning is done. So we're faced today with challenges that we have right now. But you know what? And I'm glad to see that we have many generations here. Because America has always had challenges, folks. Look at the challenges that we've had over 220 plus years. We've had earthquakes. We've had tornadoes. We've had hurricanes. We've had conflict. We've had war. We've had civil war, as a matter of fact. We'll talk about how divisive a nation can get. I don't think we're there yet. We've had drought, dust bowls, stock market crashes. We're taking some hits. But you know what? What did our founding fathers expect of us when those hits came? What do our children and our grandchildren need for us to do as those hits come? Stand up, America. Our brighter days are ahead of us. Thank you very much for being here. Let me be here.
SecularStupidist.com, Conservative.com, RightOsophy.com.